week's program. We're going to be talking to several politicians this week, but we're also going to be talking with a North Island farmer and find out what he's doing to make sure he's got resilience as far as his pastures are concerned. But in just a moment, it's animal health, prevention and cure. Nick, we've talked about getting the rams organised for the season, but what about the ewes?
Yeah, the girls' turn this week, I think. So obviously, there's some important things that need to be borne in mind before it comes to tapping. And actually, I guess it's a little bit late to be talking about it, but to sort of keep it nicely packaged, we'll talk about the whole situation here today. So, obviously, defective animals that are going to have poor influence on being able to rear healthy lambs or reproduce in an adequate and efficient way are what we're all about getting out of the flock. So simple things like broken mouth ewes, so dentition's a big thing. Animals that are holding body condition well, have gone through winter well and recovered from rearing the previous lamb crop well. All of these things need to be borne in mind, particularly udders. We want two. We want, obviously, with multiple birthing animals, we want two functional sides to the udder. So anything that's had mastitis or problems with one half of the udder should really be marked for culling.
Do you tip them upside down, or how do you check on that?
Yeah, should always check, but you should really mark them from the previous lactation, from the previous lambing crop. So that's really the time to just check that we've got two functional sides to the udder. Usually, when we have problems with clinical mastitis, it'll be fairly evident. We have a big swollen, hard bag going on when the other side's nice and soft and producing lots of milk. Yeah.
So what about just the sort of lameness and general health?
Absolutely. So as I said, the old limpers that have been limping their way through the summer months, probably not a great idea to be putting them to the tup. Big thing to be thinking about just coming up to the tup is actually the ability to flush. I mean, we're living in a dry area here in Canterbury, for instance.
The whole of the east coast of New Zealand.
Yeah, so other parts of the country, it still needs to be brought into the feed plan. Make sure you've got good quality lifting planes of nutrition to flush these ewes and get good ovulation rates. And then, of course, even further through the pregnancy, we need to make sure that in the second half of the pregnancy we've got adequate nutrition stores to be able to be raising those planes of nutrition to avoid pregnancy toxemia. And of course, particularly important once we've got scanning results in and we know whether we've got how many multiple bearing ewes we've got, triplets, twins, singletons. And even with singletons, controlling and being able to hold back nutrition so we don't end up with overfat ewes or real problems with birthing.
Right. Do you still crutch them? We used to crutch pre-tapping.
Yes, crutching's very important for hygiene, of course, and around the birthing time, of course, we obviously want a clean udder, so we need the lambs to be able to access the udder and make sure it's a clean udder. It avoids a lot of gastrointestinal diseases that we see in young lambs. Pre-lamb shearing is something that should be thought about and being planned for. It's thought that by shearing the ewe in the middle of the lactation, it induces a little bit more hunger, and so we end up with a better grown lamb. So it's been fairly conclusively proven that pre-lamb shorn ewes do produce heavier weaning weights in their lambs.
And they also get cold, so they take the lambs to shelter.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
What about vaccinations? Because you've got abortion and you've got all sorts of other things as well.
Absolutely. So abortion vaccines, some of them are actually very important to be thought about prior to the mating time. Toxoplasma is one of them in particular because it's a live vaccine, and if we give it to a pregnant animal, we're going to lose the pregnancy or have a high risk of doing so. So other vaccines, Campylobacter, for instance, it may be that we just want to boost your immunity, or if we've got younger or two-tooth ewes or hoggets that are going in to be mated, we may have wanted to sensitise them to the vaccine prior to mating so that they can get a consolidating vaccination at the time of mating, so that we've got good solid immunity through the pregnancy.
And how often does that carry on through into the lamb, or do you need to boost it?
No, you don't need to boost it. It's the immunity of the ewe in that case that's important. And the vaccine companies will advocate that Campylobacter, for instance, needs to be boosted regularly, but it's been shown that the immunity probably is a little bit longer standing than what we think. So it's a subject that should be brought up with the veterinarian locally and actually discussed. Toxoplasma is a lifelong immunity, so it's a one-off vaccine, and that will give immunity for the rest of the life of the breeding life of the animal.
So really it's all sort of about health and food.
Absolutely, health and food. That's a lot of things in agriculture, isn't it? But health and food, from my perspective, would, if it was all done 100% properly and there was no problems, I'd probably be without a job.
Yeah, I'd sort of like you to be, but not like you to be, if you know what I mean. Cholesterol diseases, we've talked about that?
Yeah, clostridial, so very important again to be thinking about that. We want animals that are maybe looking at breeding replacements, for instance, that they're fully sensitised and they only need a one shot to induce a really rapid response to the vaccine. So making sure that they've been fully sensitised before pregnancy, and then we can booster them about 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing, and then we know we're going to get really, really good passage of immunity through to the lamb from that first milk.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. In just a moment we'll be talking irrigation with Tony Daverin. Tony, continues to be hot and dry.
It does continue to be hot and dry. Last week across New Zealand, especially the areas that we're doing all the irrigating in, the eastern areas, we all got, everywhere sort of got a pretty reasonable rain. For Canterbury, for example, we got really the first significant rain that we'd had since end of January, and even up as far as the Manawatu and Hawke's Bay, which southern Hawke's Bay particularly, that were very dry, and the Wairarapa got sort of in that 30 to 35 millimetres of rainfall. So it was a very welcome relief last week, but we've gone back to what we had prior to that again, and everywhere's had 4 going on 5 days now of 25 to 28 degrees plus, quite still air, and especially on the eastern parts of New Zealand our relative humidities have been very low. For example, if you looked at the relative humidities in the Wairarapa and Canterbury on Saturday and Sunday, or Sunday particularly, we were down in the 20s, high 20s, which is extremely low, which means that your demand gets really high. So suddenly, even though day length is shortening up and you don't transpire for as long, when you have those sorts of conditions combining, then our transpiration and therefore the use out of the soil increases quite dramatically.
Soil temperatures?
Yeah, soil temperatures took a little bit of a drop last week. I mean, we had some, when the southwesterly came through, and it was an unusual rain particularly in the South Island, to get rain out of the southwest. And it was quite significant, everywhere from sort of 25 to 50 millimetres. It was cold though, and so soil temperatures took a really sudden dive, not down to the point that they're below that 10 degree threshold where you have to go, don't think I'll irrigate. But certainly it is an indication that autumn is close, or here, or nearby, and without the temperatures we've had since then, and the radiation coming in since then, we wouldn't have got them back up to where they are now again. So we just have to be very cognizant of temperatures. So it's a good time to remind people to make sure they look at their soil temperatures before they jump back in, especially from now on and into April, before they jump in and do too much irrigating.
What are the water reserves like?
Water reserves are pretty good. Groundwater's still hanging in there pretty nicely. Very little spillover from the northwest though for the main rivers, so we've had some restrictions on the main rivers still. Hawke's Bay and north, the rivers are flowing well above minimum flows, so they got rainfall the previous week, and a lot of it in the high country, or in the hill country, and so their river levels are really high, and their groundwater levels are quite high still too. So we've got through the season from a water supply point of view in pretty good shape, but we will be looking for a pretty early and pretty wet winter, I think.
Is that wishful thinking?
Well, if I could put out a wish that somebody could ordain for me in some way, unlikely, but that would be the wish. I mean, we started with groundwater levels that were very similar to what we finished with in 2015. So we started with those groundwater levels again. They're going to be significantly lower they're going to be significantly lower than that when we finish this irrigating season, whether it's next week or the week after or mid-April. And so we've got 2 years of recharge to make up if we can in one winter, which would be really nice.
And I do wish that all his wishes come true. Straight after the break, I'll be talking to Joe Goodhue.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things. Make a positive change to the planet. To feed the world. To protect the future. To live well. To be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
In just a moment, I'll be talking to Joe Goodhue. Joe, there's some news on the food safety front.
There is. The Food Act came in 2014, but it took quite a while of putting in place everything that's necessary to implement it. So the 1st of March was go live date. There's 85,000 food outlets across New Zealand, 40,000 unique businesses. So quite a few people to get across the line, but it's a much better system now for New Zealand than we've had in the past. And it took 10 years of getting the law across the line.
There were those who were concerned that they wouldn't be able to do hangies or church fairs and things.
Yeah, and fundraising is definitely not at issue. So whilst anyone presenting food for a fundraiser needs to make sure it's safe and suitable for people to eat, at the same time they won't be regulated. We can give guidance if they're asking for guidance, but they won't be regulated. It's all about risk. So a restaurant's going to have much stronger rules, regulations, and they'll need to mitigate the risks than a corner dairy, for instance. So we've got plans and we've got programs, and the risk of your business will mean you will get what's appropriate for your risk.
What's the take-up been like?
Well, in Canterbury, I can tell you there's about 2,700 businesses or food outlets in Canterbury. 1,000 of them, 35%, signed up before the 1st of March. That's fantastic. It just means that they've seen this is coming. There was enough in the way of guidance from Ministry of Primary Industries for them to get on board, so they've done it already.
Let's talk about the church fairs and stalls and farmers markets. Are they going to be hit?
No, they're not. So if you want to sell your jams at the gate or something like that as a one-off fundraiser, no, you're not hit. But if it's your business then you're definitely involved. But again, it's all about risk. So in the past we've had a one-size-fits-all. That really meant that we were regulating far too much the things that were not the risk to New Zealand. Now we all know that food safety, or people get food poisoning from time to time. So we want to put the rules and the regulations where the risk is, rather than across the board, because otherwise they get ignored, not necessarily the right outcome.
So the sausage sizzle is still okay?
Sausage sizzles are great.
Is it fair to suggest that it's sort of like a food safety OSH type situation?
It is, and it's about keeping people safe. So we want the food that not just the food that we consume domestically, but the food, as Food Safety Minister, the food that goes internationally as well. It's all about reputation. And so when New Zealand has an outbreak of any sort of food poisoning happens here in New Zealand, our international customers, they see that too. They see that on social media. So we've got a good reputation, and this law is about maintaining that reputation.
Now, on a personal note, you've made a bit of history as a minister.
The phone call that I got from John Key back in 2013 asking me to be the Associate Minister of Primary Industries was so exciting on a number of fronts, because it was a little bit after that I realised that I am the first woman to ever have a primary industries ministerial role. Actually, at the time, the first thing that occurred to me was, gosh, my dad's going to be proud, which was, really, really cool, because growing up on a farm, it just feels like I've realised a really amazing ambition that I never thought I would.
Of course, the other thing is that you know the industry, having been brought up on a farm.
Yeah, and I know some things about the industry, but I'm learning more every single day. And, times have moved on since I was on a farm in the 80s, to be fair. However, it's an industry where people are really keen to talk about the amazing things that are happening in primary industry. So I really like getting out and about and getting around the traps, meeting farmers, meeting people who are processing our food, meeting people who are exporting our food.
And you are listening.
You've got to listen, otherwise you don't learn.
Now, speaking of such things, there's a lot of stress and drama going on out there. What's it really like? What's really happening?
I think some of the drama comes from the speculation, from the wanting to put a size on how many people are going to be going to their banks and saying, I can't hang in there. So I think that things are as good as they can be, given that it is a stressful time. We know that, for instance, the volatility in the dairy industry is playing into the lives of dairy farmers and making it really tough for them. There are other farmers out there that are finding it really tough too.
Sheep farmers.
Yep, sheep farmers, in some cases grain farmers. But there are also pockets where it's going very, very well. And that's kind of helping the wider economy. And that also means that's helping places like my own electorate here is very based on primary industries. So it's not all doom and gloom. But I think the light on the horizon for me is how amazingly good everybody's been at linking arms to support those that are finding it tough. It's not in the bank's best interest to foreclose on a whole lot of farms. What's that going to do for land prices and for people's debt? It's not in their best interest. So the conversations we've had with the banks have been that they're doing their level best to encourage farmers to make the right decisions to keep them in the business. Now, there'll always be some for whom that's not possible, but I think the amount of support from Rural Support Trust, from the vets, from the bankers, the accountants, the lawyers, the primary sector businesses has meant that people are feeling supported. It's just really, really important we keep talking to each other and that people talk to their neighbours. We'll get through.
Richard, dairying and debt. You've got a pretty good opinion on both now.
Yeah, two things pretty closely tied up at the moment. Obviously, dairying has always been a high value industry, and in recent years with the boom happening, more people getting into it and more people expanding, and a lot of bank borrowing and lending being involved with that whole process. Now that the returns have made a bit of a downturn, a lot of people getting into a position that certainly no one wanted to be in. A few may have hedged against the possibility of it happening, but probably not to the extent that it's gone to at the moment. With the consequence being that we've got a lot of people who are facing a financial position that really isn't tenable. So What we have suggested as a partial remedy or a part remedy for that is a farm debt mediation bill. Ours is an amendment to the Receiverships Act. It's in the name of Ron Mark and it's sitting in the ballot at the moment. What it does is to replicate some of the farm debt mediation laws that exist in a number of provinces in Canada, a number of states in Australia, and now we understand a couple of states in the US as well. It inserts another stage into the process where a farm hits the wall. Instead of the receivers being called in straight away, there is a regulated mediation and renegotiation process that is required to take place. So the banks are then required to come and negotiate with the farmer, look at the business model, see if there's a way through it without going to the ultimate extent of foreclosing on the farm and throwing people off the land.
How far through is it, or how far away will it be?
Well, it needs to be drawn from the ballot. We've suggested to the government a number of times that they pick it up and put it on the order paper themselves. They've so far not been keen to do that. I know it was suggested to the National Caucus by one of their members a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. They weren't interested then. They don't really seem to be interested now. We're saying that this is a time we need to do this because there are so many farms, so many farmers in a precarious position, and with the state of dairy pricing at the moment, it is going to get worse, and it's going to get a lot worse over the next year and a half.
Richard, there's figures being bantered around like 100,000 small businesses in New Zealand which are vulnerable because of dairying at the moment. Can you take your Mediation Act a wee bit further and give them a chance?
Yeah, I mean, see, that's the hidden side to this crisis. I think Joe Public, sitting in the cities, a bit distant from the agricultural scene, from the reality of farming, don't understand that there aren't just 10,000 dairy farmers at risk here. There's all the workers who work for them, the businesses that depend on them. And that's the essence of the heartland. And if these farms start tipping over, sure, they'll be bought by someone. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll stay in the model of farming that they've been in traditionally. A lot more foreign owners will come in because A, it's allowed, B, they're the ones with the money. But you have entire communities that depend on the flow through from the earnings of farming. Everyone from contractors through to suppliers, local primary schools, those sort of things. The heartland's going to be under real pressure.
Let's look at irrigation, because that's another area where there's the odd question mark over, and there's those that want it and those who are saying we shouldn't be spending money.
Well, I have to confess I'm a little biased. I spent 5 years in the irrigation industry prior to going into Parliament, 2 years in Otago and 3 in Canterbury. And towards most of the new projects that we were doing, we're connected with dairy conversions, but not all. So the issue with irrigation, I know it's a bit of a cliche, and I don't have any skin in the game anymore, so I can say this. No one ever regretted putting in irrigation. It's a business that stacks up. When you put more water on, you get more production, and it pays for itself. And banks have known this for a long time. That's why they'll lend on it. So we don't have an issue with a lack of water in this country. What we have is a lack of storage, and up until now, a lack of systems for distributing it. So if we can capture the flood volumes that would otherwise get wasted rushing out to sea and put them into storage ponds, storage lakes, upcountry, use those to feed irrigation schemes through the dry season, use them to keep the rivers running and keep it healthy, everybody benefits.
That brings us back to this 100,000 small businesses type scenario. South Canterbury with Lake Opua, the whole of Timaru went, yay.
That's right, yes. And if we look at Canterbury, if we put another metre and a half on Lake Coleridge, that'll keep all the schemes going, even in the driest of years. Ruataniwha is another one that's had a lot of criticism. Now it's going ahead because they've got ACC as a strategic partner coming in with the money behind that. The naysayers, I think, are focusing on one potential downside of one potential use for that water. And everyone talks about dirty dairying. Of course, you and I know that the reality of dairying is it's not dirty. There are some bad eggs in the basket, but only a few.
Very few.
Very few, a very small number. And actually, the industry itself is well aware of what its responsibilities are and has been for some time. Having worked in the industry, I've seen farmers write, six-figure checks for effluent containment and dispersal systems. I think there's a gulf of knowledge between what's actually happening on the farm and what many in the public believe is happening. And that's partly, I guess, down to some in the mainstream media aren't keen to tell the full story. And of course, there are people with vested interests who don't want the truth to be told. But, amenity values from storage of water benefits everybody. Keeping the rivers flowing, as I say, benefits everybody, benefits the fish and the other life that live in those rivers. Storing water and regulating its outflow and using it to increase production is something that everyone gains from.
Briefly, forestry.
Look, we have an enormous resource in this country, planted very deliberately, nearly 100 years ago, by government that recognised that there was all this land doing nothing, and we could grow trees very well. What we've got now is an industry that should be one of our most valuable. Unfortunately, we are not extracting the best value from that industry that we can, the best value from that resource. Far too much of our forestry resource leaves these shores in the form of logs. We're totally opposed to that. All the value, or most of the value, in a tree comes in the form of processed products. It takes something like 7 shiploads of logs to equal the value of 1 shipload of sawn timber. We have as a policy a domestic log price, so that local sawmills can get access to the logs that they need in order to create the products, create the jobs, create the wealth, keep that wealth in the New Zealand economy. It's an absolute no-brainer to be exporting logs in an unprocessed raw form. When you look at who's buying them, and everyone says, okay, the log trade with China in particular, China's taking or has this demand for this vast volume of logs. They're not buying them because they want logs. They're not building log cabins. What they're wanting is the products that those logs can be made into. And it's absolute folly for us as a nation to not be selling them those products, rather than simply selling the logs to make them themselves.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. You're talking niche rather than commodity. I'll be back with more straight after the break.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Let's start the discussion about dairying, because that's the one that everybody's got on their lips, isn't it?
Well, there's a big problem at the moment, and it's really hard for a lot of particularly share milkers and farmers that have spent a lot, particularly on irrigation, on capital, big irrigators and the like. And I think with the industry $38 billion in debt, there will be a bit of a shakeout with these low prices. But I think it's also an opportunity just to look where we've been going with dairying and the major expansion, the fact that the industry hasn't really been paying the price in terms of climate pollution and water pollution that it contributes to. We've seen Landcorp's decision to dramatically downsize its conversion plans. We need a much more mixed, diverse land use, and the interest in conversions has been encouraged by government with its big subsidies in the form of irrigation payments, and we'd like to see those come to an end.
There would be those who say you're anti-farming, but I'm sure you're not.
No, not at all. I mean, farming accounts for a major part of our exports. We need a secure climate for a stable farming industry. What we want to see is a more diverse land use, more diverse sector, more added value and more innovation, so that we're not as vulnerable to the swings in commodity prices that we've seen with the dairy downturn.
We can go with all that lovely, warm, fuzzy stuff and farming?
Well, I think if you look at some of the work that people like Alison Jews have been doing, where work in the Waikato on a number of farms has shown that by reducing herd size from 600 or 700 cows down to about 300, you can be as profitable, if not more profitable, but your capital costs and your input costs come down. We've got an industry that is now the biggest user of palm kernel expelliarmus in the world as supplementary feed. So we pride ourselves on being clean and green. We market our produce on the basis that it's clean and green, yet we're exporting palm kernel with the forest destruction that that involves and not playing to our strengths, being pasture fed. So even Fonterra has come out recently encouraging farmers to do more about being pasture fed. Dairy NZ is emphasising that too. So we need to move away from this high input cost model, which has got high costs for climate and for water pollution, back to our strengths and looking at what's profitable on farm rather than focusing on maximising production all the time.
Growing grain instead of bringing that palm kernel in, for example, it's about the same price.
Well, yeah, but growing grain here rather than contributing to...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And having a much more mixed land use here as well.
We've flowed into, I guess, climate and climate change.
Well, that climate change is really important to the Green Party, and we said to the government last year in advance of Paris, we recognise that you are saying that agriculture is the barrier to acting on climate. And so we said 5-year transition before agriculture comes in under the ETS, though we'd prefer a carbon tax, because one of the reasons we've had this massive expansion in dairying is because it hasn't been paying the price of its climate emissions or its water pollution. 47% of our greenhouse emissions comes from agriculture, methane largely. We need to farm, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't pollute the climate. So if you put a price on the pollution, that doesn't have the same incentive that we have at the moment. People have been encouraged to convert by the government not putting a price on water, subsidising irrigation and not putting a price on climate pollution.
So I guess you're sort of saying you need some sort of a tax, or I hate to use that word, but...
No, we've proposed a carbon tax, but all of the revenue that a carbon tax would generate would come back to households and companies. It wouldn't just go into the consolidated fund, and that would be through a 1% cut in company tax and a cut in income tax as well. So we want to see the bads tax rather than the goods. Income is a good, but we should be taxing the bads like pollution.
And water, I mean, that's another hot potato.
Well, I think we've seen this government with its big handouts for irrigation, the 400 million that it's itemised from the sale of our energy companies going into the Crown Irrigation Fund. It's been about 160 million that's been spent on subsidising irrigation to date or allocated for those subsidies. So you see big schemes like Ruataniwha, major impacts on the Tukituki River system. A lot of those that will take the water up would be dairy, because dairy's been the one industry that's been able to pay the price of the water, and that encourages more intensive agriculture, more nutrient leaching, higher stock numbers and this high cost capital intensive model that we've had.
So you'll be very pleased with the research that's being done at Lincoln University to try to stop it or try to minimise it from phosphate and from nitrogen.
Yeah, but I think the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment showed in her quite substantive report in 2013 that even with the best management practices that I know Lincoln's trying to encourage, you're still going to get more water pollution because of the scale of conversion. We have the equivalent of 90 million people in New Zealand now because of the increase in our dairy herd to 6.2 million. Yes, that's going to come down with the lower payouts, but it's now is a really good time to look at what we've been doing, the intensive model. It's got high cost to farmers and to the environment. We need to have a more diversified farming model.
Have you got a loud enough voice?
I think we have been saying that the dairy bubble is going to burst. It has. That's high cost to a lot of people in the industry. But we can look now at things like manuka. The price of manuka honey is going through the roof. Now people are being paid to plant manuka. For years the Green Party said we should be protecting our shrublands instead of clearing it because it's got major benefits in terms of soil stability and also for biodiversity. A lot of the birds like the bellbird love Manuka shrublands because of the insect life, and then honey production, and all of that going into added value, because that's what we haven't been doing with dairy either. There hasn't been enough adding value, and things like Manuka, where it ends up in wound bandages and other health uses, is a major adding of value.
Wonderful, thank you very much indeed. In just a moment we'll be meeting a North Island farmer who's getting resilience in his pastures. Adam, tell me about the property.
We're located 20 minutes south of Rotorua and 10 minutes away from Tokoroa as well, so in the South Waikato Bay of Plenty border.
What's the effective area?
118 hectares.
And number of cows?
320 Friesian cross cows.
Do you winter over?
Yes, yep, we winter all the cows on with supplement made on the dairy platform.
Let's talk about pasture, because you don't take a regular mix, you actually make your own up.
Yeah, I do. With the Seed Force boys have helped me over the last 5 years about getting better pasture in our weaker soils, which were forestry conversions. First forestry conversion was 10 years ago, down to the last one 4 years ago.
Now that'll be fairly light dirt?
Yes, it is extremely light, but it's improving. But we've tried a few options there and finally settled on fescue.
So fescue, is that because of the rooting system?
To be honest, we were just looking for anything that would grow in summer on the lighter soils, and we ended up with that after ryegrass and clover had failed. We'd also tried chicory, and yeah, we've settled on fescue, and it seems to be doing the trick.
Is fescue just part of a mix?
No, we have coxford in there, and also a little bit of clover still.
Talk about production if you would, because all farmers want to know what the guy across the other side of the fence is doing.
Yeah, off the 320 cows this year, we'll do 155,000 solids, which is roughly $4.90 a cow. We're reasonably happy with that, and that's on a system 3, so 14% brought in feed of their total diet.
And what about pasture renewal?
Pasture renewal, we're just cropping to help us through the summers, and we're putting in ryegrass and clover behind the crop, and obviously on the forestry areas, that's where we're doing the fescue and coxford.
You into fodder beet yet?
No, I haven't twisted my arm yet, but it's getting pretty popular around here. So yeah, I'll watch the neighbours, but more and more that's happening, yeah.
It was interesting though that after about 10 minutes talking with the boys from Seed Force, he's now going to be doing fodder beet. We'll be talking to Jim Grierson straight after the break. I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Jim, dry as.
Dry as. I mean, the last time I was here, we had a really good rain post being here a fortnight ago, and that was everybody was pretty relaxed about that. And in various parts of the greater country, 24 mils through to 70 mils was recorded, so that was looking really well. and the temperatures started to drop a bit. So with we've got a real autumn rain here, we're going to have some longer term benefit. No, it didn't happen.
Well, everybody keeps saying it's not going to let go.
No, it's jolly dry, and we've had the nor'westers too in amongst all that now, and things are back to where they were before. So growers have really got to be diligent about making sure they have their water regimes up to spec, because right at the moment we're still in the critical stage for a lot of bud development for next year's crops, and we cannot afford to get a dehydrated situation between now and about the middle of April. So I would say get back onto those irrigators and get them wound out for probably another 30 mils this coming week, and then hopefully after that there are some rain predicted. It looks like it's getting further away rather than coming towards us. So I would say within the next week we have to have a pretty good rain of about 30 mils put on by the growers.
If not, you've got to put it on.
If not, and hopefully another 30 mils. And that should carry us through to April, okay. About 60 mils of rain through this next month really would be really nice. So let's hope the good Lord provides most of it.
May your good wish come true. Fertiliser.
Yeah, we're sort of coupled with the moisture really. So the moisture, soil moisture, temperatures and what have you are all related to how you best maximise your application of autumn fertilisers. So if you've got some moisture there, the fertiliser will adhere to the soil particles better, and you'll get a slow usage and distribution of that fertiliser, depending on if it's ammonium, it's got a form of ammonium in it. But if it's dry, it'll sit there, and of course once it stays dry, it'll lift off. So at the moment we have got sufficient probably moisture in there to make some good fertiliser applications meaningful at this time. But once again, introducing some water with it would make it a hell of a lot better. But these are more for horticultural crops. We build up potassium at this time of the year, get the nitrogen levels back up. Growers have got this concept that if we get a lot of rain through the winter, a lot of that's going to leach. It's actually not. It's going to get down to the soil profiles where it needs to go to the rain's going to take it down to those soil profiles and the root hairs and the deep-rooted trees and bushes that may be out there. So it's going to actually cover them through the period of sort of May, June. And then in August, September, we may need to do a little bit of a top-up, especially with a nitrogen type formulation, just to give some of the crops a bit of a boost along.
What are the markets doing?
The markets are in pretty good shape for horticulture, to be honest, Rob. Obviously our horticultural crops are in full swing in terms of harvest, especially apples and getting the latter part of stone fruit now, coming into kiwi fruit shortly, tamarillos and things like avocados, all going well, and the prices are good. And our exchange rate is a little bit, although the dollar's gone up a little bit just lately, it's pretty favourable, and we're in a better position this year than we were probably the last 2 years. So quantity's down a little bit though because of the frost we've had during the November period, and of course we've had a bit of hail around the country too, so that's managed to knock a little bit of fruit off. But having said that, the quality that we have got there is good. It's got good colour. We were getting concerned about the fruit. I think I may have said it last time I was here, that it was a little bit soft, and that was because we weren't getting those cooler temperatures in the evenings. Now, this week we've got temperatures back up to 12, 14 during the evening, or during the night. We need them to be down in 8 or 9 degrees, and then we get that really crispy, high levels of starch in the fruit. Sugars hold nicely, and the fruit continues to store better and is nice and firm. And of course that helps the export of our product. I was talking to a very big onion grower yesterday in mid-Canterbury, and they're going well with the onions. Not top prices, but medium prices. And if they have a whole season of selling medium prices, they're going to end up having a really good season. Medium-sized onions, nice, good 4 layers of skin on them, nice and brown, and they'll carry through and come out the other end at Europe in really good condition for the consumers.
Obviously it's ideal for them to dry out too.
Yes, it is ideal. I mean, they're cutting them, they're leaving them on the top, coming along and picking them up like stones, and they're nice and hard. They've got those 4 skins have developed, gone brown, which they're meant to do, and they stay nice and tight, and they keep the fruit, as it were, inside in really good condition, and that's great condition to have going away the heck over to Europe.
And we've got the nets on most of the vines?
We have. The nets have finally gone on the vines. An interesting time last week when we had that big nor'wester, some of the nets came off the vines, so the guys have had to re-net. But yeah, the grape crop's looking pretty good. It's really interesting. I spent quite a bit of time in Marlborough and Waipara of late, going around a few grape growers, and the crop's actually heavier than last year, but it started off heavier. So they've lost crop with frost. There's no doubt about that, but there's actually still a good, well-balanced crop out there, and with good-sized bunches. So I would say we're in for a reasonably good tonnage this year again, Rob. The Pinot Noir, we're looking really, really good. Some of the early bubbly wines are coming off now. Chardonnays have started, and some of the early Pinots to create bubbly. And the main harvest will get underway any time now, probably about next week actually. Yeah.
Music to my ears, Jim. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Jimmy was talking about fertiliser. Let's now catch up with Dean White from Mainland Minerals. There's an old saying, Dean, that when money's tight, you've got to think. And so basically, as far as fertiliser is concerned, you do have to.
You do, Rob. You've got to take a step back when things get tight and look at where you're spending your money and where you can get your efficiencies from. What we're finding out there at the moment is that in these tougher times, having the chance to actually look at your whole business and analyse where your costs are coming in and where you can start to make those efficiencies. In terms of the fertiliser side of it, we see in a lot of cases that there has been over the years probably a lot of excess nutrient that's been applied and hasn't been really used to its full potential, probably because in a lot of cases the whole system, biological system, the soil system isn't able to trap that nutrient and use it efficiently. So by just taking a step, looking at the bigger picture and saying, well, what can we do to improve on our soils and our soil biology and get the pasture working more efficiently, you can start to throttle back on some of those nutrient inputs you've been putting in.
People do overlook the soil, even though we know that that's what the plants feed off.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got into a habit of really looking at what the plant needs and what the animal needs. But the reality is none of that starts without a good soil. And within that soil there is a whole ecosystem of microbes and worms and a lot of things that we can't see and what we don't believe is there. If we start to feed that biology, to look after that biology, to treat it with probably the respect that it really deserves, that's where we can get some really big gains in terms of soil structure, soil profile, nutrient being taken up into the plant more efficiently, and that flows into the pasture quality, the pasture palatability, so that when the animals are grazing the pasture, they're getting the most out of it they possibly can.
You'd suggest then that soil tests are vital?
Soil tests are a part of the picture, and they are essential. I think one of the most vital things that most farmers don't use is sitting in their shed, that being a spade, is actually go out and have a dig in your soil, see what your soil's doing, see what your pasture root depth is. Just make sure that you feel comfortable with the whole ecosystem and the biology and the rooting depth and those things that really are going to drive the efficiency of the nutrients that you're putting on. So, but soil tests, it's important to maintain those basic macronutrient element levels. Essential to have the juice there when the motor starts running, but you've really got to get the motor running.
So how do people learn to do that?
By just really getting their hands dirty, getting in touch with preferably a rep from Mainland Minerals who can come out with a spade. We always have a spade in the back of our car, who can walk through a farm with you and just say, let's have a look at the bigger picture. Let's not just look at the numbers, but look at the whole system, what's going on.
Kira, you've just been to Geneva.
Yes, I have. It was wonderful. I had about 2 weeks ago I went over as part of the Associated Countrywomen of the World United Nations Committee, which I'm through on that because of our affiliation with Rural Women New Zealand. We're affiliated, and that gives us that voice at the United Nations on behalf of women around the world. And went to Geneva to attend the meeting of Child Rights Connect, which is a global alliance of non-government organisations, or NGOs, who are all focused on addressing and implementing and making governments accountable for ensuring they address child rights, the rights of the child, which are stipulated in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I also had a meeting while I was there with the director of the Health Promotion Unit at the World Health Organization, WHO, and we talked again about what their focus is for health promotion throughout the world. And it was really good to see how they interconnected. And much of child rights is around those basic human rights from a child perspective. You know, the rights to health services, the rights to education, freedom from abuse, freedom from violence, the right of clean, fresh drinking water, but also a really interesting one about the right to access your sense of belonging in terms of who you are, your culture, your heritage, really an important right for children. And we see that a lot of abuse of that, and currently in things like the refugee camps, where children their births aren't being registered, so they have no country of state, so they're quite disconnected from who they are and where they fit in the scheme of things. And to talk with the World Health Organization about the work they're doing with governments around health promotion. And they're moving their focus a little bit away from specific diseases. They're still focusing on those, but their main focus now is on the social determinants of health. And that's things like addressing poverty, health and education, and general access to services, clean health, drinking water, and dealing with violence and abuse, and all those issues that make up a person's health and well-being. And so this was really quite a good connection between that and the child rights work and how that all works together. And when we bring that back into the New Zealand context, we're sort of like, what are the abuses on child rights here and social determinants? And we see that we still have issues around poverty, and some of our rural communities are particularly bad. If we look in the Northland areas and throughout New Zealand, there are areas that have really bad poverty. Okay, yes, it's not the same as what you might see in Africa, but in the context of New Zealand society and New Zealand economy, yes, we have some quite bad poverty. And if you address issues like poverty, you address access to health services, good education, you're actually addressing the health and well-being of the people. And once you've addressed that, you actually start to see them develop better. And this was something that was discussed quite a lot at the Rural Women New Zealand conference last November, and we've been talking with government since that around how do we as a society and a government make sure that we look after the health and well-being of our people. And one of the key movements throughout the world now is something they call health in all policies, and it's around making sure that all government policy has at its core the health of the people. So if the policy isn't good for the people, why are we doing it? Because the key being that if the people are healthy and are in good space, good mental health, there's no violence, no crime, limited numbers, then they're actually healthier as a population, and when they're healthier, they're actually more productive. So you have that spin-off into better economic development and growth. So if you centre everything back at health and well-being, you're actually doing a whole lot better for your country. So it was a really interesting discussion.
It would have been an amazing few days.
It was. And to see that that's now the focus from the World Health Organization is around those social determinants and bringing that through into government policy and encouraging governments to address those issues and making sure that they're looking at, particularly also the child rights work we were doing, is how governments inadvertently perhaps or through ignorance don't address the rights of children. And of course these are the next generations who are coming through to run our countries and be productive adults in the future. And so we need to make sure we're giving them the very best start we can. And New Zealand does reasonably well, but there's a lot more we can do. There are things that we don't do that are really in contravention of those rights. For example, one of the simplest things is the Convention of the Rights of the Child defines a child as any young person under the age of 18. Now, yet in New Zealand, we use 16 as an age for changing to adulthood. When you look particularly at things like welfare benefits, they all cut at 16. We start trying our young people in the adult legal system from the time they're 16 and 17, and yet technically, under international law, they're still children. And when you're putting young people at that age through an adult legal system and you're putting them in jail, you can't then expect them to come out with a better outcome than they went in with. So we've got to start looking at how we actually deal with our children if we're wanting to have better growth and development for the country in the future, for our future generations.
There's an old saying, isn't it? Give me a boy until he's 7 and I'll give you the man.
Absolutely. And it very much starts from dealing with children and issues around all our issues around family abuse and child abuse. And globally, that also takes in things like child marriage and female mutilation and all those other issues that we do see pockets of it here as we have this more multicultural society, we are seeing the odd pocket of it. So we need to look at how we address those issues and make sure that we're looking after our children properly.
Kerry, thank you very, very much indeed. If you'd like to double check on some of the things that she's saying, you can always go to our website, which is ontheland.co.nz. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed the program, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.